All right, so here I'm rolling on the ball on my foot. This is in an effort to loosen up the under surface, the musculature under the foot, the plantar fascia. I've had plantar fasciitis, I've had Achilles tendonitis. So a lot of these things are very tight in my foot. I've had broken bones on my feet from sports that I played before I was a powerlifter, accidents. So I've always had lower leg issues, and this is a good starting point to kind of loosen up my lower legs. Then I'll transition into a calf stretch. So I like getting on the wedge, and what I'll do here is I'll bend into the stretch, and then one at a time I will lock one knee. So when you're already under a stretch and then you lock the knee, you can really create the leverage to get a very intense stretch, especially for the gastroc, which is the muscle of the calf that goes across both the ankle and the knee joint. So you're stretching it at both ends here. It is a pretty intense stretch. I'm sure you guys have all felt something similar, but when you get the stretch and then you lock the knee, it really intensifies it. When you first start, it'll be pretty tough, but I hold it for about 10 seconds on each side. I just focus on breathing steadily and can control my breathing, as opposed to like panicking and holding my breath and then doing it for like 2 seconds and stopping. So this way you can kind of work your way through the intensity of it, but it is important to kind of get that time where you're under the tension. Then I'll transition to doing both at the same time, once I've done a couple on each side. And doing both at the same time is, again, another level of sort of intensity. And it's very, very helpful. It helps to reduce a lot of knee pain when you can keep the tension off of the kind of the fascia in the back of the knee. So yeah, I definitely suggest doing this, and I spend a bit of time doing it each day. So then I'm transitioning to the hip, and so this one I am rolling on the same ball, and now I'm kind of getting in on the deeper tissue of the hip. So superficially there's the glute maximus and glute medius. More superficially there's the glute minimus, and then deeper than that you have the internal and external rotators. There's 6 deep rotators, as they call them, including the piriformis, which is kind of the bigger external rotator that goes from the tailbone horizontally out to the kind of greater trochanter, which is kind of the bony protrusion on the outside of your hip. That's actually part of your femur. And so that's heavily used in powerlifting. When you squat, you create a lot of external rotation. If you sumo deadlift, you create a lot of external rotation. So that can get very tight. It can press on the nerve and give you kind of the same symptoms as like sciatica. Not as severe as some other ways you can have it, but loosening that muscle up can be very helpful. So this is a great way to do it. It's pretty intense if you haven't done it. It feels like you're rolling across a piano chord when you really feel the piriformis. But this is a very good way to kind of dig in. The ball kind of fits in there perfectly between the crest of the hip and then that greater trochanter. So it really lets you roll around on it and dig into a lot of tissue that will prove to appreciate being pressed upon. It is pretty intense again, but yeah, this is good. And then crossing the leg just kind of exposes the tissue just a little bit better than if you just sit on the ball. So that's kind of what I'm doing right there. All right, so the next stretch is now the same musculature. It's the hip. It's the rotational aspect of the hip. So that's why the knee in front is bent to 90 degrees. And what I do is I lean forward at the waist. I allow my lower back to stretch as this one. You don't have to. You can kind of bow forward with your chest up, but I focus on letting my back stretch as well. I used to do it more the other way, but now I always let the back stretch as well. I kind of bend towards the knee, bend towards the shin, I bend towards the foot. The different directions will kind of affect a different balance of kind of pure flexion, which is more the glute, and then more rotation, which kind of hits the deeper rotator muscles. So, for example, like my left leg, I have a harder time going towards the foot, but I can go towards the knee. On the right, I can go more towards the foot, and it's not as easy for me to put my head down towards my knee. So here I'm moving into a couch stretch, which is basically like a hip flexor and quad stretch. This is very tight for me. My hip flexors are extremely tight, and it kind of limits a lot of my motion, so I do just try to kind of work through it as best I can. And then I transition into a quad stretch where I kind of lean forward. And this stretch, again, it kind of lets me pre-stretch the psoas and then really crank with my hand on the quad by pulling that tighter. So the psoas is kind of the anchor for the hip flexor. It runs through the center of your torso from each side of the lumbar vertebrae to the front of the hip, which is the anterior superior iliac spine, which is part of the this is basically the anchor for all the hip flexor muscles coming off the front of your hip. Now I'm actually lying on the right, which is a little device that you basically lie on, and it digs right into the psoas, and it allows you to kind of loosen that up, which again, for me, is extremely tight. So I'm just trying to address it, and this can help to reduce, back pain and kind of increase your performance as well.